All right.
Whenever you're ready.
Try not to do my arm thing. The samurai were the knights of ancient Japan. They started to develop around 646 AD as a warrior class. They rose to the pinnacle of their power in the 16th and the 17th century when they de facto ruled over the entire country. The role of the samurai was much like the role of the samurai, much like their Western counterparts, was to be a warrior class and to wield most of the military power in ancient Japan. However, in later years, the samurai took on additional administrative roles and actually had to deal with the business of running the country. Okay. The samurai's role in society was as a warrior class. They wielded most of the military power in the country. However, as their power grew and as they became the de facto ruling class of the country, they eventually had to set about the actual business of running things. And so samurai would also be found in administrative and bureaucratic positions. Despite the fact that there aren't any samurai left around today, we do have a lot of enduring culture that the samurai gave us. Because the samurai believed that a warrior needed to be a well-rounded and fulfilled person, they didn't only practice martial arts, but also practiced a number of other arts. Flower arranging, sumi-e painting, Japanese poetry, the haiku were all things that were generally practiced by the samurai. They invented the tea ceremony. Many of these things are still practiced by the Japanese widely today, not to mention martial arts. Because the samurai were a warrior class, the true crucible of the samurai martial arts was actually the battlefield. So most Japanese samurai martial arts techniques would start out being developed out on the battlefield. And then a soldier that found a particular technique useful would bring that back and share that with his fellow members of his military unit. Now, as time went on, various techniques became more and more popular, so eventually they'd be expanded and turned into general methodologies that would be taught to larger and larger groups of soldiers. So over time, as these techniques were taught, various teachers gained certain amounts of renown for teaching these martial arts techniques, and these teachers were highly sought after by the daimyo, or the Japanese feudal lords, and they would be brought in and paid very handsomely to teach all of the samurai for a particular lord's court or unit, something like that. Want to do that again?
Yeah.
All right. I liked the crucible thing.
Yeah, that was good.
The crucible. Getting more conversant. This is good. Ready? Question. Because the samurai were a warrior class, the true crucible of samurai martial arts and martial arts traditions was actually the battlefield. The samurai would go into battle, and a samurai that would return successful might have found a particular technique that was really useful. So he would share this technique with the other members of his military unit. Now, as various techniques and various methods became more and more popular, they would start to be systemized and turned into a methodology. This methodology could then be turned over and trained to larger and larger groups of soldiers. As these methods or these arts got bigger and bigger, you would find teachers that became very well adept at teaching these martial arts and would actually make quite a name for themselves as martial arts instructors. These instructors would be sought out by the daimyo, or the Japanese feudal lords, and be paid quite handsomely to come in and teach all of the samurai under the command of a particular lord. Now, these traditional samurai martial arts that developed over the years, towards the end of the samurai era, or the Edo period, which is about the end of the 19th century, records show that there were more than 1,000 different specific styles of martial arts that existed at that time. However, over time, the number of these martial arts has dwindled. We still have maybe a couple hundred today that are practiced. In addition, certain martial arts are reaching back and restoring some of the original samurai techniques. Martial arts like kendo, kumdo, shinkendo, and of course our martial art, bukendo. All of the martial arts styles that developed over that samurai period, all of the martial arts that developed during the reign of the samurai, no, all of, I don't want to start there. Where do I want to start? I want to start somewhere else. What do you do? Many of the martial arts that the samurai developed actually still exist today. Not in there, no. A lot of, not many. Some of. Some of the martial arts that the samurai developed still exist today. Now, at the height of samurai power, there's records that show that there were at least 1,000 different styles of martial arts. Now, over time, the number of those arts that are still practiced has dwindled down to maybe a couple hundred. However, you have certain martial arts that have attempted to reach back in modern times and bring forward some of those old traditions. Arts like Kendo, Kumdo, Shin-Kendo, and of course our martial art, Bukendo. So the question arises, is the practice of martial arts just a preservation of history and a preservation of these ancient practices? And the reality is in some ways yes, and in some ways no. There are a lot of martial arts styles, or koryu, which do attempt to maintain. So the question arises, does the study of the sword really just preserve those historical arts? And the reality is that, well, in some ways yes, and in some ways no. There are a number of styles of Japanese swordsmanship that are called koryu, and they focus a lot on practicing the martial art the same way it's been done for hundreds of years, and are very focused on maintaining that tradition. However, there are other styles of martial arts and Japanese swordsmanship that actually take the practice of the sword and try to use modern knowledge and modern techniques to continue to bring the art forward into the modern age. So the question arises, is the practice of Japanese swordsmanship really just to preserve these ancient historical traditions? And the reality is that yes, in some ways, but in some ways, no. There are versions of Japanese swordsmanship or styles called koryu, and the koryu really do focus on maintaining the swordsmanship tradition and practice as it was hundreds of years ago and trying to maintain it the same way into the future. But there are other styles of martial arts and Japanese swordsmanship in particular that are trying to bring modern techniques, modern thinking, and modern knowledge to bring forward the old traditions and continue to improve upon them. So how many people actually do this sort of thing? Well, it's actually really kind of hard to know. But our best estimates show that perhaps about 3% of the population practices martial arts. And of that 3%, maybe 10% of those people practice a Japanese samurai art. So if we were to work those numbers and just take a vague estimation, we could say there's probably about 950,000 people practicing the samurai arts in the US alone. So what kind of techniques do we teach our students? Well, the techniques that we teach our students, we start off practicing on an individual basis with a bokken or wooden sword. Now with the bokken, students practice cuts and swings and various forms of maneuvering the sword. They practice footwork so that they can move around the room freely while they use the sword and really not get in the sword's way. But then beyond that, we also have a number of ways that students practice interacting with each other and practice against one another. Among those practices, we have partner kata, or forms. And a form is basically a choreographed fight, if you will, with particular moves that each person is going to perform. And if done repetitively, it helps to train the muscle memory of students into working those moves and having those moves really sunk in. Now, beyond that, we also have much more combative material and sparring material where students learn a number of techniques which can include attacks and counterattacks, and they go through an entire series of this material working to pit every single attack versus every single counterattack and to truly understand how all of those different techniques will interact with one another. Now, beyond the basic katana, students are also exposed to the other weapons that samurai would commonly use. They're exposed to the wakizashi, or short sword, to a two-sword style called miten, and to the yari, or Japanese spear, and the naginata, or Japanese halberd, and then beyond. That one needs, yeah.
Read it out.
Yeah.
So you don't call them students.
Students. Oh my God, students!
Students!
Alright, what time is it?
1:40. Not quite.
Do you want
No,
to?
I think we're
Okay,
good.
keep yours.
Let's stop at about 2,
Okay,
and then see how far we are. Shoot our footage then.
cool.
I can say the full clouds.
Huh?
I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, he needs to shoot about 20 minutes of B-roll footage, so if we shoot from 2 to 2:20 and then get you out of here,
Probably be alright.
B-roll footage,
It's
I'll
a
explain
technical
it.
A-roll?
B-roll.
The type of techniques we no. Good. The type of techniques that we teach students vary. No, okay. How do I want to enter? Students. Yes. In Bukendo, students learn a wide variety of techniques. Now, most white belts or beginning students come in and they start their training with a bokken, which is a wooden sword. With the wooden sword, they're going to learn various swings and cuts and footwork to help them basically just learn how to move and how to use the sword while they're... In Bukendo, students learn a wide variety of techniques. Now, most white belts or beginning students are going to come in and they're going to start learning using a bokken or a wooden sword. And during this practice, they'll learn various cuts and swings to learn how to maneuver the sword, and then they'll learn a wide variety of footwork so that they can move around the room freely while using that sword. Now, once students kind of have a general grasp how to move and how to use the swords, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start them in on partner techniques. The first group of partner techniques students will be exposed to are known as partner kata or forms. Now, a kata is basically a choreographed fight between two students. Each student has their particular moves which they're going to perform, and those moves will build together to kind of create a martial arts lesson. Now, the students will perform these katas over and over and over again until those lessons just basically get ingrained in muscle memory. Now, once students kind of get beyond that and they have the basic ideas of sword combat under wraps, the next thing that they're going to do is they're going to learn more combative or sparring material. Now, this material is where students really get to challenge one another and really get to test their techniques. The combative materials will use various attacks and counterattacks, and students will take the opportunity to basically use every single attack against every single counterattack to learn all about the possible interactions between the attacker and the defender in any given situation. Now, beyond just the basic techniques with the katana, students will also be exposed to using the short sword, which is known as the wakizashi. They'll be exposed to niten, or a two-sword fighting style, where a student holds the wakizashi in the left hand and the katana in the right hand. They'll also be exposed to the yari, or Japanese spear, and to the naginata, or Japanese halberd. So students get a wide education of the various weapons that the samurai would use. And much like the samurai, though, the education a student receives in Bukendo really doesn't stop at martial arts techniques. We try to introduce the student to a number of other pieces of the samurai culture: language, history, some of the samurai ethics, and some of the various samurai philosophical beliefs help round out the mental aspect, which is really just as important as the physical aspect of the study. People that come to study Bukendo are motivated by a wide variety of possible factors. Some people come in for just simply having an activity with which... The motivations behind studying the Japanese sword vary from person to person, and really as many Japanese sword students as there probably are that many motivations. But a lot of people are motivated by an appreciation of samurai culture, an appreciation of the artistry behind using the sword. Some people are motivated by more basic factors, just like seeking physical fitness and the fact that the sword's a heck of a fun way to do that.